morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good, good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good morning, sun. Good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good, 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 good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are
And hello for this, for me, evening time episode. And I can't tell if streaming is working. It kind of looks like Twitter is working, but YouTube, no idea what's going on there. So we'll see if this actually works. I have a recording in case it doesn't make it over to YouTube, but it is on Twitter and Twitch. So with that, where am I? It is late for me, so I apologize in advance for the inevitable yawns that are going to occur during this stream. So this is about getting BC version numbers from Docker containers using PowerShell. And that's what I started on this morning, which led to some learning, some questions, some discussions, and kind of flowered into this much bigger conversation, completely unintentionally. But I'll explain kind of why I'm doing this. So the short explanation is I want to, when I create a Business Central Docker container, I want my automated build script to detect which version got created or which version of Business Central is being used to create that Docker container, Docker image. And I want to know what version I had and what version I now have with this new container as I do a build every single morning. And let's look at what that might be. So I have a separate script that runs daily to check for new versions of BC Container Helper. And so you can see in this email on the 11th of June, I had version 2.0.12. It detected that version 2.0.13 was available. It performed the update, did a post-update verification of the version, and it sends me this confirmation email. Super handy. One, it lets me know that a new version was available. Two, it installs it. And then it just lets me know the old version, new version, and I can kind of orient around that. And then I can go look up, say, the release notes for that. So super handy. But you'll notice in this one, this is my build email for just a Business Central container. And when this runs, because it's using Docker and because it's involving Docker images and Docker containers, I hadn't yet figured out how to grab the version number from Docker, because Docker doesn't provide objects and which have version number properties like BC Container Helper, which is a PowerShell module, applet, I forget what it's called. So much easier to do with BC Container Helper, not so friendly with Docker on Windows. Because apparently Docker on Unix is a little different, but Docker on Windows with PowerShell, yeah, as far as I know, you have to do string parsing. If you know of a better way to do this, definitely let me know. I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just kind of hacking away and doing string parsing in order to get this information. If there is a better way to get this directly from Docker using some type of PowerShell object, I'm all ears. I am by no means an expert, and this is not the definitive guide. This is a way, not the way. So, little segue, BC version numbers. We have a version number like 18.0.12345.0, and that is the major version, the minor version, the build, and revision. And so, for example, this is, I think this is my SaaS sandbox test environment. Business Central 18.1, Platform 18.0, blah, 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 application, which I think is the one that we care more about, application 18.1.24822.24906. So 18.1s are kind of major and minor release, and then we have the build and revision numbers. Just those could get incremented internally at Microsoft on a daily basis, but any given release, I believe, is typically major and minor. So 18.0, 18.1, 18.2, and in the SaaS world, we're less concerned, I think, with the last two segments, but there is a question of hotfixes, and I don't yet know how those are versioned, if those are associated with specific builds and revisions. I'm assuming so. So that's the concept with the version number structure. So why do I care? Couple reasons. There are a lot of versions potentially if you're doing Business Central development. You have your SaaS production environment, and that could be, say, 18.1, and then you could have sandboxes in your SaaS environment. And you can actually have sandboxes that are different versions potentially than your production environment, tenant, whatever that is called. And so you could have production with one version, sandbox with another version. You could have multiple sandboxes, theoretically, I think, with multiple versions. So you're kind of juggling that potentially. Then if you're doing development with Docker, like I am, things can get really zany. You can pretty much have any version from 17.6 all the way up to 19.0 if you're using the BC Insider builds. So it kind of matters what version you're working with, and I want to start paying closer attention to this. So far, I've just been using, well, let me show you. So far, like this is my script, and as part of the new BC Container script call for BC Container Helper, you will now call get BC artifact URL, and this is as of June 2021. So this could change in the future, but get BC artifact URL goes and makes a call to retrieve a particular BC image that can be used based on the parameters you specify. Do you want the W1 image? Do you want the US image? Do you want the UK image? So you can have different country specifications. And then which version do you want? Do you want latest, first, all, closest, second to last, major, current, next, minor? So you have several predefined options there. And I have just been using, like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just went with the latest. So that's what I've been getting. And so those are the latest non-insider builds that I've been pulling. I have not been using an insider key yet for my standard daily generic dev builds. So I've been using latest. Now, I may need to rethink that. And I may have multiple containers with multiple versions. So it'll be even more important to understand which version was installed for which container. So if I create my standard dev 18 container, maybe that's latest. And then maybe I do a BC Insider container, and that's Insider. And I'll want to know, is that 18.2, 18.3, 19.0? Maybe I'll specify next minor on one and then next major on another. Maybe I'll have multiple versions within the Insider builds. Not sure yet. So I really need to keep track of it. So how do I do that? I have previously tried to do this, and I think I failed a couple times. So today, somehow, without knowing what I was doing, I hacked this together. And so let's give this a try. So Studio 4. Here I am on my Docker server, and I have the script I created this morning just for reference, but I'll just walk through it to stumble through the bleary thought process that I had at the time when I did this. So the idea is, as far as I know, please let me know if you know of a better way. I have not found it. As far as I know, when you're on Windows with Docker, you typically, in an automated scripting fashion, you will interact with Docker via PowerShell. That's how I've done it. There may be a different way, but PowerShell is my interface with Docker on my Windows Server machine. So I will do something like Docker PS. This command will allow me to see my Docker containers. So let me maximize and do that again. Oops. Okay, so here I have a container called test 18, and then I have a dev 18, and then I have a BC preview, which I don't know where I came up with the preview name. I'll probably call that Insider from now on, because I think that's the proper term for this. Okay, so you notice test 18 is, there's an image. It's referencing an image called iDev18. That's what I name it. I just put an I in front of the container name. So I first build dev18, and I use an image name of iDev18. And that iDev18 image is using sandbox dash 18.2, 26.217, 26.795 dash US dash MT for United States multi-tenant. It's a mouthful. So given this pile of text that I see here, how do I extract the version of Business Central that is being used for my Dev 18 container? It's a bit of a mess. So over the preceding year or month or whatever, I have hacked together some very crude techniques to figure out how to do this. So here's what I did. I start with Docker PS. This is my baseline. This is the raw data I have to work with. And turns out there are some really powerful features in PowerShell to format this data. And it took me a while to figure this out. But if you're interested in learning more, check out Shane Cow's videos on YouTube. He has an entire 50 video series on learning PowerShell, and his business now is Power Apps 911, I believe. But if I'm recalling that correctly, but he used to do a lot of PowerShell work. And so he's got this fantastic series that just steps you through the process and really helps explain some of the fundamental concepts. But I hacked together this technique previously. So I'm going to do Docker PS, and I'm going to use the -- format parameter. And what you can do with this is extract, say, column names. Somehow it knows how to do this. So instead of getting that messy multi-column layout that has line wraps, I'm going to do this, .names. I guess there's some implicit object structure within that Docker PS output that it's able to read. And I'm going to have a tab I think that's the tab. And then I'm going to do the image label. So let's just see what this outputs. So you notice rather than these really long lines with messy output, I just get the columns or field values that I need. Name and image. I don't care about the ID and the hexadecimal stuff. This is all I need. Okay, now I only care about my sandbox containers for now. I am not going to deal with this preview image. So I only want the containers based off of this iDev18 image, for instance. So how do I filter this result just to see basically one line? So if I rebuild the dev18 container, I just want to know the current version of that container, then have it rebuilt, and then the new version of that container. So I want to know a before and after version number. So how do we do that? So let's take it another step. So I can have a pipe here saying, take this output, pipe it into the next command. So I'm going to do a pipe and, oops, it won't let me press enter. So I'm going to do select, so string, and I want to know the dev18. I just want this one line for dev18. So I'm going to say select string dev18. Now, if I press enter, you'll see I have a little bit of a problem because I have iDev18 here. That contains dev18. This contains dev18, and this contains dev18. So I have dev18 in 3 places on 2 different lines. If I have 10 containers based on iDev18, I'd have 10 lines. So it didn't really help filter. It filtered out BC preview, but that's it. So let's try this again. So instead of doing select string dev18, I thought, well, I've got a bit of a challenge. I can't use dev18 because it's there, and it's there. So what if I kind of add a hack to prefix my container name with something that makes this value more unique? So I figured that I can do this prefix. I'm going to put a prefix of BC in front of my container name. I'm not even going to filter it. So if I do that, notice I have BC test 18, BC dev 18, BC preview. That makes it different from iDev 18. So I'm kind of giving myself slightly different data that I can filter on better. Okay, cool. So now that I have this BC prefix, I can get a more unique container name. Now I can pipe it and do select dash string BC dev 18 because that's the name of the one container I want to work with. And look at that. I have now figured out how to take my messy Docker PS, get just the 2 columns I want, manipulate the data to give it a unique enough value so that I can filter on just one line. And now I have my container name with a prefix BC dev 18, and I have my image label, as I'll call it. It's the image name, colon, and then sandbox, then the BC version, then USMT. So this is like an entire image label. Okay, so now I've got the line that I want. How do I extract just the 18.2, etc. version information? So to do that, I am going to, let's see. This is where I start to need to have some script. So, okay. I don't know how to do it all in one line. Okay, so we had the format here. I did the select string. Now that I have this string output, I can actually convert it from a delimited, tab delimited file format, essentially. It sees this as a CSV table, tab delimited. And I could say, well, let's convert this and put a header on it of name and image to make it pretty. Okay, so I'm going to now output this just to see what it looks like. Okay, so, image info. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, so now I took that data, it breaks it out into two different columns, name and image. Okay, so not too exciting for that step. Well, now that I've got that and everything looks nice and clean and separate, I want to store that in a variable. Okay, so I'm going to, and I don't know if there's a better way, but it seems that in PowerShell, you kind of need to stuff values into a variable in order to then work with their properties and call certain methods. So for instance, if I want to grab the image column from my image info and then convert that to a string, I first need to store it in an image label variable. There may be another way, but it's not, the IntelliSense certainly doesn't kick in automatically. So I'm just going to take this image info output. With this technique, I'm able to grab just the image column and ignore the name column, which is super cool, super powerful feature of PowerShell. And then I want that to be in a string format, so there's no confusion about what type of data. So now I'm just going to move this down. Let's output my image label, as I'm calling it. So I'm now going to run this. So this is now my image label. So whereas before I had a name column and an image column, I now just have the value from the image column. So I'm really narrowing down that messy data down to one specific string value. Okay, next up, I just want the version. So I don't need IDEV18. I know that's my image name. That doesn't help me get to the version. Let's see if, I don't think YouTube is, yeah, I still don't see YouTube stream, but okay. So I want to strip out IDEV18. There's no value there. So there are a few ways to do this, but I did a couple steps, and I probably could have done it cleaner, but I said, well, here's my image version string. I want to do a substring technique. And so I want to find where there's sandbox dash in the name via substring, find that position, and I want to use index of, find the position of sandbox dash, and then use substring to strip everything out before that point. Okay, so let's see what it looks like once I do that. So I'm just kind of whittling this data down step by step. Okay, now I got rid of IDEV18 sandbox dash. I'm down to just 18.2 and then the USMT. Okay, well, assuming USMT is fairly consistent, I could use substring again, but there's kind of a fun technique that is very handy in situations like this, and that's to use replace. So rather than trying to search for wherever something is and then whack it out, if you're just removing it, you just replace it with an empty string. So if I replace, I know what my image name is. Oh, it looks like this is an alternate version. Okay, so this was the substring version. Let me just comment that out. So instead of using substring, finding position, and then carefully dissecting things, you can just use replace. So I know what my image name is. I defined it up here. So it's already in a variable. I know it's IDEV18. So I'm going to use replace image name with blank. Once I replace that, I'm going to next replace :sandbox dash with nothing, with empty string. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to replace -us-mt with empty string. And so this is I think a much simpler way than dealing with substring and string character math and calculations. And so I'm going to grab the current image number, and let's see if that works. Look at that. 18, 2, 26, 17, 26, 795. So with just essentially 1, 2, 3 lines of code, PowerScript, I'm able, PowerShell, PowerScript, oh my gosh. I am able to take the messy output from Docker PS and get the the BC version number for a specific Docker container. Very cool. So then, what do I do with this? Well, I want to do two things with it. I want to record the before container version and the after container version. And I want to write those values before and after to a separate log file. So to do that, we have a few more lines. So let me go in here. So I've got my version, and I'm going to create a new variable for a version file. And so I'm going to create a version file on my D drive logs with the container name, BC version log test txt, and we know what that is. And I'm also going to define the current date and current time. And a handy way to do this is get date-format, and then you specify your format string. You will find some very convoluted blog posts on how to format date and time in PowerShell. This is super easy. Once I have the date and time, current date, current time, I'm going to assemble a string that represents the line of text I would like to write to my log file. So I have version entry, current date.toString, a tab, current time.toString, a tab, and the current image number. Now this is the current image number. So in my real script, I'm going to grab the before, grab the after, and assemble it all in one line. But this is just a test. Then finally, to write to that text file, there are probably 5 ways to do this. I found a command called add content, and it appears to just append a line to a file. You specify the path, and then the string you want to write to that file, and it does it. So let's give this a try now that we have everything assembled. Let's see if it works. Okay, so that ran. So now here's my test file, and you'll see I have the date, a tab, the time, a tab, and my current Docker container version number. So we're well on our way to making this happen. So then that is just the sample code that I prototyped to get the version from a container. So I then had to slip that into my new BC dev container version 3. Ooh, let me update this. 3.0, and this is June 15, 2021. Okay, so this is a script that I have a blog post for. I'll be posting this new version on a new blog post. And I'm just getting things set up. What is my container name? What's the image name, dates and times? So I had a few other date and time formats here, but I'm going to add these because they're isolated date and time and allow me to put them in separate columns in the tab separated file. I have a new variable for version file, which I created in that test script, BC version log. And then I have all my standard existing code. And once it is done creating my new container, before I do that, I added this code. So before I wipe out my existing container and rebuild it, I want to get the current version info. So this is the information you just saw. This is my hack to create a container tag with a BC prefix so I can uniquely identify my dev18 container or test18 or whatever it is. This is just the Docker PS command where I'm formatting it with the name and image just like before, selecting the container tag string of dev18 for instance, and I'm converting from CSV and adding columns name and image, then getting the image field value, extracting the image label just like what we did. Looks like this is redundant just like in the sample. So I don't need image version. I'm already working with image label. Okay, so I'm using the replace here. So basically I'm getting the current image number. Then I call BC container helper, create a new BC container. Then once that is done, I have my finally block, and I do the same process again. Probably don't need to redefine the container tag, but I just copied and pasted. I rerun Docker PS to get the new container information. And I don't need the substring. I do the replace to clean everything up, get just the version new image number. I then build my version entry for my log. So you see I have the current date, current time, current image number, new image number. And that's what that is. So before, after. And then I write that entry to my log file, just like what I showed in the prototype. And finally, I add this information to the body of the email that gets sent to me every single morning. So when I rebuild Dev 18, or when my script rebuilds Dev 18 at 7 a.m. every morning, I'm now going to get the prior BC version and the new BC version for that container. So super handy information for me. And there may be some bugs, like what if the container doesn't exist? It's the first time it runs. Will this error out? I don't know. We'll find out. I may have to enhance this a little more. So I'll test it for a few days before I post it. So with that done, I did a quick test, and this is what the email looks like now. So prior BC version, these are both the same because I just ran it on the same container. And so I'll have the old and new container version. Very handy. So why do I care about the BC versions? Like, it's nice to kind of know, but 18.2, 26.217 versus 27.395, what difference does that make? Well, what I'm ultimately doing, the reason I'm ultimately doing this for is I want to better understand how much lead time I have between Business Central versions and releases. We know that, say, a wave 1 and wave 2, so 2021 wave 1 is typically, I think, in April, and then 2021 wave 2 will be in September, October, something like that. So, yeah, October 1st. So April 1st, October 1st, generally 6-month release cycle. Those are our major wave releases. But let's say that's every 6 months. So next major, we have up to 6 months in advance before that will actually start to roll out to online SaaS tenants. Well, if I'm doing testing of my app source solution, I should probably pay attention to next major. But what about next minor? What about latest? Like, can I rely upon latest containers, image versions, to detect potential bugs? And how much lead time does that give me? So let's say I was not terribly responsible about this, and I'm just doing BC Docker containers using latest. How much warning would I get if one of my tests failed, had an error? How much time would I have before I needed to fix that and prepare a release? Well, in theory, the latest build could be rolling out to production. So I could have 0 days or 1 day maximum or minimum. But could I potentially have 30 days advance notice before those latest builds start to roll out to production? I don't know. So that's an unknown. That's kind of what I'd like to see, is how much lead time does any given release type provide me. Next minor. So 18.1, 18.2, 18.3, what does that release cycle look like? And if I'm paying attention to that in my Docker builds or my Docker images, as soon as I see 18.3, I want to record that date, and then I want to see when 18.3 actually releases to a production tenant. I want to get that lead time. And then maybe the developers have been working on version 19.0 6 months ago, right? So maybe version 19, if we're using the insider builds, maybe we really have up to, say, depending on their dev cycle, maybe we have 12 months notice on that. And so maybe that's kind of overkill to really aggressively monitor next major. I don't know, about to find out. So by logging this in terms of my container builds, my container image version numbers, and by hopefully creating new containers with next minor, next major, and perhaps some other versions, I'll start to see trends and get some baseline so that I know, okay, I have roughly, say, 2 weeks notice if there's a hot fix is going to come out. Or maybe next minor, I'll have a solid 2 months notice. And then next major, I'll have 6+ months. No worries. We have plenty of time on that. I'm just kind of curious. And this is all in the context of, say, an app source or even a PTE. How far in the future do you need to be paying attention to these builds and versions in order to be prepared to, say, fix bugs, deal with breaking changes? And if the AL language has a change, some feature is deprecated or implicit with needs to be changed in your code, how much time do you have to deal with those changes? I'm just kind of curious. And I just want to be analytical about it rather than assume, oh, I have plenty of time. Well, we may not. It may be shorter or longer than we think. So I'd like to figure that out. So with that, that's what I learned today, is how to use PowerShell to hack on Docker PS output in order to get the version of my Business Central containers. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I thought it was much more messy, and somehow it seems to be pretty simple, just a few lines of PowerShell. So with that, I am tired and I am signing off, and there are a few more discussions about this in the bigger context of DevOps and pipelines and automated testing and how many build agents should you have running and how frequently, based on a discussion I had today with some of the other BC folks. So have a good one and enjoy. Where is it?
Good morning, sun.